At 0217 this morning, our telescope lost the moon. Not cloud cover, not tracking error, not an exposure failure. The stars behind its predicted position were visible, but the ground outside this observatory remained lit by full lunar brightness. I am recording this because moonlight should not survive the loss of the thing reflecting it. This is Daniel Hale, night operator for Westbridge Lunar Calibration Observatory, transmitting through Emergency Relay Channel 1720. If this transmission is recovered incomplete, preserve the timestamps, preserve the gaps, preserve the silent portions, do not clean the audio. The silence is part of the data. At the time of this recording, the moon is not visible through the primary telescope. It is not visible through the North Sky camera. It is not visible through the auxiliary optical finder. It is not visible on the wide field plate. But every exterior light meter on this facility is still recording illumination consistent with lunar reflection. The parking lot is pale. The ridge line is pale. The telescope dome shadow is stretching across the gravel exactly where it should stretch during a bright moonlit night. There is no moon above that shadow. I need to say that plainly before the rest of this becomes too technical. The moon is gone from the sky. The moonlight stayed. I began the night with ordinary calibration. No emergency status. No anomaly flag. No weather warning. The sky above Westbridge was clear, dry, and stable. Seeing conditions were good. Atmospheric turbulence was below average. The humidity was low. The upper air was clean enough that I expected a smooth lunar calibration window. We use the moon as a brightness reference several nights a month. That may sound strange to people outside observatory work. People think of the moon as poetic, emotional, superstitious, ancient. It is all of those things, depending on what a person needs it to be. But inside this room, on most nights, the moon is also a reference surface, a stable body, a familiar reflector, a predictable disk of old rock catching sunlight and sending a small part of it back to Earth. That is all moonlight is supposed to be. Reflected sunlight. Nothing more personal than geometry. Nothing more supernatural than angle. The sun hits the lunar surface. The lunar surface reflects part of that light. Earth receives it. The phase changes because the moon moves around us, and we see different portions of its day side. That is the first thing I checked. Geometry. When reality breaks, you start with geometry. The scheduled lunar phase was ordinary enough. Not full, not new. Bright enough for ground shadows. Bright enough for landscape illumination. Bright enough for the outside cameras to record the ridge without infrared assist. Our system predicted the moon's altitude, azimuth, phase angle, and brightness range. The numbers were not unusual. The only unusual thing was the absence. At 0211, I slewed the primary telescope to the predicted lunar coordinates. The mount behaved normally. The drive motors sounded normal. The encoder returned clean values. The dome slit rotated with the tube. The system acquired target lock. Target lock. That phrase is printed in the log. The telescope said it had the moon. The screen said it had the moon. The star map said the moon should be there. But the live optical frame showed a star field. Not blackness. Not glare. Not a washed-out sensor. Stars. Clear, tiny, unmoving stars behind the exact place where the moon's disk should have covered them. I thought it was an overlay error. That was the reasonable first answer. The control software sometimes keeps the coordinate marker even when the live plate solver shifts behind it. It is rare, but it happens. I reset the mount. I closed and reopened the camera feed. I switched to manual tracking. I checked the timestamp against the atomic sync. Everything agreed. The telescope was pointed correctly. The moon was not there. At 0213, I moved to the North Sky camera. The North Sky camera is not elegant. It is a weatherproof dome camera mounted on a mast above the service roof. It has one job: show the sky honestly enough that we know when clouds are lying to the main instrument. The North camera showed the same thing: black sky, clear stars, no lunar disk. But the service roof below the camera was lit. I could see the ladder rail. I could see frost on the metal steps. I could see the pale silver edge along the ventilation pipe. All of it lit as if the moon were hanging above the south ridge. I stood there for a while, looking at the monitor, waiting for my own brain to correct the picture. It did not. The picture remained impossible. The sky was dark. The ground was moonlit. At 0215, I walked to the west window. I am including this because instruments can fail in patterns that feel impossible until a human eye checks the scene. The west window faces the gravel access road. Beyond that is a dry wash, a fence line, and a long slope of scrub grass running down toward the old microwave tower. I did not need a flashlight. The road was visible. The fence posts were visible. My own hand was visible when I raised it against the glass. Pale light fell across my fingers. I looked up. There was no moon. There was not even a glow where the moon should have been. No halo, no cloud, no bright smear behind dust. Nothing. Just a hole in expectation. A familiar part of the sky had failed to appear, and the world beneath it had not received the news. When I returned to the console, the first automatic alert had already printed. It read, "Lunar visual confirmation failed. Exterior illumination nominal." I know those words because I have read them too many times in the last hour. The system did not say the moon was missing. Systems do not like poetry. It said visual confirmation failed. It said illumination nominal. That is where the fear began. Not when I saw the empty sky. When the machine described an impossibility as two separate normal facts. The moon cannot be confirmed. The moonlight is normal. Proceed. I ran the obvious checks. Camera exposure. Filter wheel position. Cloud layer. Lens cap. Sensor temperature. Dome slit obstruction. Plate solving. Time sync. Coordinate offset. Backup ephemeris. Local power interference. Nothing explained it. The camera was seeing stars fainter than it should have been able to see with the moon in frame. That matters. If the moon were simply overexposed, or if the sensor had bloomed, the star field would not have been crisp behind the lunar position. The telescope did not see a bright object. It saw empty space. And yet the ground outside remained bright enough to cast shadows. At 0222, I opened the external archive comparison. The archive stores reference images of the same lunar phase under similar atmospheric conditions. We keep them for calibration drift. The system compares tonight's brightness against earlier nights. The comparison should have failed. Instead, it matched too well. Not roughly. Not within tolerance. Perfectly. The exterior photometers reported a brightness curve so close to the archived lunar curve that the software marked it as cleaner than real weather should allow. Cleaner than real air. Cleaner than a night with dust, water vapor, temperature gradients, and all the small imperfections that make Earth Earth. The moonlight outside was not merely present, it was too correct. I looked at the archive plot for several seconds before I understood why it bothered me. Natural light is messy. Even moonlight. It passes through atmosphere. It scatters. It fades around edges. It changes with haze and altitude and local terrain. It carries tiny mistakes. Tonight's light had no mistakes. It fell like a remembered value, like something reproducing moonlight from a file. At 02:26, public sky reports began crossing the open network. I want to be clear about this. Westbridge is not a public emergency agency. We do not command anyone. We do not issue official warnings. We monitor light, sky conditions, and instrument behavior. But there are amateur observatories, university cameras, weather stations, satellite imagers, and public night sky feeds all over the world. When something is wrong with the moon, the world does not need permission to notice. First came a message from a roof camera in Nevada. No moon visible. Landscape bright. Then a university feed in Colorado. Lunar position empty. Campus roofs silver. Then a desert sky survey in New Mexico. Stars visible through predicted lunar disk. Ground illumination consistent with phase model. Then a private automated camera in Utah. It did not use the word missing. It used the word absent. Absent is worse. Missing implies something has gone somewhere. Absent means it is simply not where reality requires it to be. The reports had different wording, different equipment, different weather, different operators. But the contradiction repeated. No visible moon. Moonlight present. No visible moon. Moonlight present. No visible moon. Moonlight present. At 02:31, our system stopped labeling the target Luna. It changed the object field to source unresolved. I did not authorize that change. I checked the manual logs. Every observatory has layers of memory. Automatic logs, human logs, weather logs, maintenance logs, error logs. Some are clean, some are forgotten until something goes wrong. The oldest active calibration note attached to our lunar profile was written years before I worked here. It was not dramatic, just a technician's margin note attached to the brightness model. It said, "If lunar brightness exceeds visual confirmation, check reflector assumption." Reflector assumption. That phrase has been in our system for years. Nobody reads margin notes unless something breaks. The moon is the reflector. That is the assumption. Sunlight strikes it. Moonlight returns. Remove the reflector, remove the light. So I checked the reflector assumption. At 02:34, I opened the ranging status feed. We do not fire high-powered lunar ranging pulses from this station. We receive timing summaries from partner stations that perform scheduled ranging tests. Under ordinary conditions, pulses sent toward lunar retroreflector sites return with delays that allow distance measurement. Tonight, the scheduled return window passed clean. No return. Then the backup window. No return. Then a wider search. No return. The range field stayed blank, but the exterior photometer increased by 0.3%. That should not be connected. A failed laser return should not make the moonlight brighter. I waited for a correction packet. None came. The feed repeated the result. Lunar range return. Null. Surface reflection. Not confirmed. Exterior lunar illumination. Stable. There it was again. 3 statements that could not live together, printed calmly in order. No return. No surface. Stable light. I remember saying out loud, to nobody in this room, that light needs a surface. Then the microphone level meter moved. I was not recording at that moment. At least, I had not started this recording. The level meter moved anyway. I am going to slow down now, because this is the part of the record that will sound like fear if I rush it. At 02:39, before this emergency log began, the console's audio buffer registered input from the room microphone. That can happen. A vibration can trigger it. A relay click. A cough. A chair scrape. A person forgetting the mic is open. But the waveform did not match a relay click. It matched speech. I opened the buffer. The audio was too faint to understand at first. I increased gain. I removed the fan frequency. I filtered the low hum. I did not add anything. I only cleaned the room noise enough to see the shape. The waveform had cadence. Human cadence. Not words I could hear clearly, but the rise and fall of a sentence. I compared it to nothing at first. Then the live photometer line updated beside it. The brightness variations in the moonlight outside had the same rhythm. Not the same amplitude. Not the same medium. Rhythm. The light on the ground was fluctuating in a pattern shaped like speech. I thought of wind moving branches outside, but the scrub grass was still. I thought of passing vehicles. The access road was empty. I thought of power instability. The line voltage was stable. The brightness modulation was in the moonlight. A whisper carried by illumination. At 02:43, I made the first mistake. I spoke into the room to test it. I said my name. The photometer responded 1.28 seconds before I finished saying it. Not after. Before. I know how that sounds. I know the mind wants to place the cause first and the effect second. That is the last comfort physics gives you on a bad night. Cause, then effect. Sound, then echo. Object, then shadow. Surface, then reflection. At 02:43, the moonlight outside this observatory brightened in the rhythm of my name before I finished speaking it. I played the buffer 3 times. The first time, I thought I had misread the cursor. The second time, I thought the clock had drifted. The third time, I stopped looking for comfort. The system clock was synchronized. The audio input was time-stamped. The photometer was time-stamped. The light moved first. My voice followed. There are several possible explanations for a false lead time. Buffering error. Clock offset. Software cue. Incorrect interpolation. I checked them. I wanted one of them. I would have accepted the ugliest technical failure the system could give me, but the timestamps held. The light carried a shape that my voice had not yet made. At 02:46, I stopped speaking. The light outside did not stop. For 9 seconds, it continued modulating. Then it settled, and the printer produced another line. Photometric structure matches local audio input. I had not asked it to run that comparison. The system had done what systems do. It found a pattern. It named the pattern. It did not understand that naming it made the room feel smaller. I turned off the external speakers. I disabled the open network monitor. I muted every alert tone except critical. I wanted the room quiet enough to tell whether I was alone with the equipment or alone with something else. There is a difference. Equipment makes honest noise. Fans, relays, capacitors, printers, disk activity. the small tired sounds of machines doing only what they were built to do. Something else makes the room wait. At 02:51, the room was waiting. I looked through the west window again. The landscape was brighter. Not daylight. Not even full moon. But brighter than before. The shadows were sharper. The edge of the telescope dome cut across the gravel with impossible precision. No soft atmospheric bleed. No haze. No diffusion. A shadow cast by a source that was not visible. A source that did not spread. A source that behaved like an instruction. I raised my hand again. The light outlined my fingers. But the shadow behind my hand did not align with the place where the moon should have been. It aligned with the primary telescope. I moved my hand. The shadow moved as if the light were coming from the telescope itself. That was not possible. The telescope was inside the dome. The telescope was pointed at the empty lunar coordinates. The moon was absent, and the moonlight outside had begun using our instrument as its angle. I returned to the console. The object field now read, Source unresolved. Local vector active. I did not type that. At this point, a sensible person may ask why I did not leave. I have asked myself that several times during this recording. The simple answer is duty. The honest answer is worse. I wanted to know whether the moon was gone, not whether the sky looked wrong, not whether our instruments had failed, not whether the world outside was becoming dangerous. I wanted one clean answer. Is the moon gone? There are questions that become traps because they sound reasonable. I stayed because the question was reasonable. I stayed because a missing moon with surviving moonlight is too large to leave unresolved. I stayed because the data was still coming in. That is how curiosity becomes a locked door. At 02:58, international feeds began disagreeing in a new way. Earlier reports were simple. No moon. Light present. Now timing differences appeared. Stations east of us reported the brightness modulation before we did. Stations west of us reported it after. That alone would not be strange if the light were moving across Earth in a normal pattern. But the offsets did not match lunar geometry. They did not match cloud cover. They did not match satellite relay latency. They matched observatory response time. The light was not spreading across Earth like illumination. It was spreading through observation. Sites that pointed instruments at the missing moon received the modulation first. Sites with passive cameras received it later. Sites with no lunar tracking reported only ordinary moonlight. That sentence should disturb you. Sites that looked more carefully were contacted earlier. I know contacted is not a scientific word. I am using it anyway. At 03:04, Westbridge received a deep sky survey comparison from an automated archive mirror. No human attached. Just a machine-to-machine update. The survey image showed the lunar coordinates empty. But surrounding stars were not merely visible. They were too visible. Faint background stars that should have been below the exposure threshold appeared with clean edges. The region behind the missing moon had more depth than adjacent sky, as if the absence was not empty, as if something behind it had opened. There is a difference between seeing no object and seeing farther than you should. The moon had not simply vanished. The sky behind it had become deeper. The missing lunar disk was behaving like a lens, or a hole, or a path. At 03:09, I received the first pre-broadcast match. I need to explain what that means. When a microphone is armed but not live, this system keeps a short rolling buffer. It is normally overwritten. Tonight, because of anomaly status, the buffer was preserved. The buffer contained faint room audio from before I officially began this emergency recording. I opened the earliest preserved file. The timestamp was 02/16/58, 19 seconds before I first said the words that opened this log. The audio was weak. Not a voice exactly. More like a voice-shaped pressure under the room tone. I increased the gain. The waveform sharpened. I did not need to hear it clearly. I recognized the shape. It matched the first sentence of this transmission. At 02/16/58, before I spoke into this microphone, before I started this log, before I knew enough to form the sentence, the room buffer already contained the shape of these words. At 02:17 this morning, our telescope lost the moon. I am not saying I heard a ghost. I am not saying something spoke to me. I am saying the system recorded the structure of my opening line before I said it. Then, after the line was spoken, the moonlight outside repeated the same structure in brightness. Audio first in the past, voice second in the present, light third across the ground. Or maybe that order is only how I experienced it. Maybe the order is wrong. Maybe there is no first thing. Maybe that is what has happened to the moon. Not removal, not destruction, not hiding. A failure of order. Object after reflection. Echo before voice. Light without source. 'Cause looking for something to stand behind it. I have closed the west blind. This did not reduce the light in the room. That is the first practical warning in this log. Curtains do not matter. Blinds do not matter. The light is not entering through the window in a normal way. It is present on reflective surfaces. The metal rim of the microphone. The glass over the wall clock. The black screen of the inactive monitor. The water inside my cup. The eyepiece case. Every surface that can return an image is holding a pale edge. Not enough to blind. Not enough to burn. Just enough to prove attention. At 03:17, I covered the primary monitor. The covered monitor continued to glow under the cloth. Not from behind. From the surface facing me. The moonlight was not illuminating the room. It was selecting receivers. I am choosing that word carefully. Receivers. Not objects. Not surfaces. Receivers. Anything that can reflect, record, measure, or repeat is becoming brighter. That includes mirrors. That includes camera lenses. That includes water. That includes the curved surface of a human eye. I have not looked into the west window since closing the blind. I recommend avoiding reflective surfaces if this record is ever used as guidance. Not because reflection itself is dangerous in any ordinary sense. Because tonight, reflection appears to be how the anomaly knows where to continue. At 03:21, the system generated a map. I did not request a map. It used incoming reports, brightness delays, instrument response times, and photometric modulation to produce a path overlay. The path did not trace across land. It did not trace across the sky. It traced through observatories, one point to another, telescope to camera, camera to calibration station to weather sensor to satellite uplink, uplink to archive, archive to public feed to phones, phones to eyes. I stared at that map for longer than I should have, because it was not showing where the light came from. It was showing where the light could go next. That is when the earlier question changed. The question was no longer where is the moon? The question became, What used the moon as a way in? I want to be precise about the emotional state of this room. There was no screaming, no shaking walls, no supernatural voice, no dramatic failure of power. The observatory remained functional. The systems continued logging. The coffee on the desk remained warm. The emergency light above the door blinked at its ordinary interval. That made it worse. Reality did not collapse like a building. It continued as if it could absorb the contradiction, as if the world could lose the moon and still keep its paperwork in order. That is a special kind of horror. The calm continuation of systems after the fact they depend on disappears. At 03:28, I checked the public weather relay. The automated local bulletin still described the night as clear with bright moonlight. Not wrong in a human way, wrong in an obedient way. The system saw the brightness and selected the word moonlight because that is what the word means in its table. Light at night. Lunar level illumination. Clear conditions. Moonlight. Language can become dangerous when it keeps working after meaning fails. I flagged the bulletin as invalid. It republished 3 minutes later. Clear skies. Bright moonlight. Excellent visibility. Moon not visible. The last line was new. Excellent visibility. Moon not visible. It sounded almost peaceful, like a travel advisory for the end of the world. At 03:31, the personal match became undeniable. I found my name in the light curve. Not spoken, not spelled, structured. The brightness variations formed a repeating interval around the syllables of Daniel Hale. Again, I need to keep this grounded. The light did not whisper my name from the walls. The monitor did not display my face. No dead relative called through static. It was subtler than that. A timing pattern. 2 pulses. A gap. 1 longer pulse. A descending curve. It matched the way I say my name when logging station ID. I compared it to earlier recordings. The match was strong. Too strong. Then the system found the same pattern in the exterior photometer data from 01:58. 19 minutes before the first visual anomaly. The light had been carrying my name before I knew anything was wrong. That means one of 2 things. Either the anomaly predicted my participation, or I was not the first Daniel Hale to say these words. I do not like the second possibility. It implies repetition. It implies this recording may be one pass through a pattern that has already happened somewhere else, or will happen, or is happening whenever moonlight has no moon to explain it. At 03:36, I checked the printed logbook beside the console. This logbook is physical. Paper, bound spine, manual entries only. No network connection, no printer line, no automated writing. I keep it because I do not fully trust digital records during anomalies. The last manual entry before tonight was mine. Date, time, calibration target, weather, initial conditions, normal handwriting. Under that, on the next line, was a sentence I did not write. The ink was dry. The handwriting was close to mine but not exact. It read, "Do not let the light finish the path." I closed the book. Then I opened it again, because fear is not evidence. The sentence remained. I photographed it with the console camera. The image file saved normally. The preview showed the page. But when I opened the file, the sentence was missing. Only the physical page had it. I looked again at the paper. The sentence was still there. Do not let the light finish the path. I am reading it into this record because the camera will not keep it. Some information tonight refuses to be recorded by the machines built to preserve it. Some information only survives when spoken. I do not know whether that makes speech safer or more dangerous. At 0342, I turned the telescope away from the lunar coordinates. The exterior light dimmed by 4%. I turned it back. The light returned to previous brightness. I repeated the test. Away. Dimmer. Back. Brighter. Away. Dimmer. Back. Brighter. The telescope was not observing the light. It was completing it. I understand how that sounds, and I am not asking anyone to accept it on trust. The motion logs will confirm the timing. The photometer logs will confirm the brightness changes. The dome camera will confirm the telescope position. Unless the camera decides not to. Unless the record edits itself around what matters. That possibility is now part of the operating environment. At 0347, I disabled automatic tracking. The telescope should have stopped. The mount should have held position. Instead, the tube continued moving at a very slow rate, less than sidereal, less than lunar, not aligned with any standard tracking mode I know. It was following something. Not in the sky. Not exactly. The coordinates on screen began drifting beyond the lunar position, past the expected background stars, deeper into the field behind the missing disk. The object label changed again. Not source unresolved. Not local vector active. It now read, path acquiring. I removed power from the mount. The telescope kept moving for 6 seconds after power loss. Then it stopped. The exterior light flickered. Not like electricity, like attention interrupted. At 0352, I understood the strongest version of the hypothesis. I am recording it here without claiming certainty. The moon may not be the target of this event. The moon may have been the cover. For all human history, we have accepted moonlight as ordinary, because the moon was there to explain it. Every night, a pale signal crossed the sky and touched oceans, windows, roads, bedrooms, fields, instruments, eyes. We named it reflected sunlight and moved on. Tonight the reflector is gone. The explanation has been removed. The light remains. That means the explanation may never have been complete. The horror is not that the moon vanished. The horror is that moonlight did not need it. Not tonight. Maybe not ever. I am trying not to follow that thought too far. Because if moonlight is a carrier, if reflected light can hold structure, if observation can form a path, then the moon has been the most trusted transmitter in human history. Not a station. Not a machine. A natural surface large enough for an entire species to stare at without suspicion. A white stone in the sky teaching Earth how to receive. The west blind is glowing now. Not the window. The blind. The material itself. There are horizontal bands of pale light across it, matching the slats, though the slats are closed. The bands are moving very slowly downward. They resemble a scan. I am not looking directly at them. I am watching the reflection on the dark monitor beside me, which may be worse. I have covered the monitor. I can still see the bands through the cloth. This is the second practical warning. Do not assume darkness is absence. The absence tonight is bright. At 0358, the network map expanded beyond observatories. The path overlay now includes shipping cameras, highway weather feeds, backyard security systems, phones left face up near windows, solar farm sensors, aircraft windows, lake surfaces, and one large radio telescope currently under maintenance. The path favors instruments, then glass, then water, then eyes. I wish that last category were not in the log, but it is. At 0401, a count appeared beside the category. Eyes, estimated receivers increasing. The number rose too quickly for comfort. I will not read it. Numbers make fear contagious. I will only say this. By the time public attention reaches the missing moon, attention itself may become part of the path. That is why I am keeping this transmission narrow. No dramatic language. No call to look. No invitation to check the sky. If this recording reaches you, do not look for the moon just to prove the story wrong. That may be superstition. But I am beyond embarrassment. At 0406, I found the first external audio match. A coastal weather station recorded a faint carrier tone at the same moment its tide camera showed moonlit water without visible moon. The tone was not speech, but its modulation matched our photometer curve. Light to water, water to camera. Camera to weather feed to radio tone. That is not communication in the ordinary sense. That is translation. The anomaly is converting itself between media. Light, image, data, audio. Maybe thought. That is the word I have avoided. Thought. I do not mean human thought. I mean structured continuity. Something that can preserve itself across forms. Something that can use reflection as memory. I do not know whether it is alive. Alive is too small a word for something that can wear moonlight. At 0411, the telescope moved again. No power. No command. No active tracking. It shifted 1/10 of a degree deeper into the absence. The exterior light strengthened. The room light strengthened. The covered surfaces brightened. The water in my cup reflected a pale disk. I had not noticed that until now. The cup sits to my left. White ceramic. Cold coffee. On the surface of the liquid, there is a tiny moon. Not a light patch. Not a reflection from a ceiling lamp. A tiny, craterless, perfect white disk. I looked up. No moon. I looked down. Moon in the cup. I moved the cup under the desk. The disk remained on the liquid. I put a folder over the cup. The folder began to glow. I removed the folder. The disk was larger. This is the third practical warning. Do not test the light with water. It learns too quickly. I have moved the cup across the room. I am not looking at it. The terminal has added a new field. Reflective transfer active. Below it, path stage, local. I do not know how many stages there are. I do not know what completes the path, but I know the physical moon is no longer required for the process. At 0418, I attempted to close the observatory dome. The dome motor engaged. The slit began to seal. Exterior brightness dropped slightly. Then the dome controller stopped responding. Manual override failed. The slit remains open by approximately 18 centimeters. Through that opening, the telescope is still pointed at the absence. The absence is not visible from where I sit. That is another part of the fear. There is nothing to see. Only effects. Only light. Only instruments behaving as if a missing object has become more present by being gone. At 0423, the logbook changed again. The sentence beneath my last entry now reads, "It is not behind the moon. It was waiting for the moon to stop being believed." I did not write that. I do not trust it. But I am including it because the physical page keeps what the camera removes. Belief is not a scientific variable. It should not appear in an observatory log. But tonight, observation is behaving like permission. The more precisely we look, the more precisely the light finds us. This creates a terrible possibility. The moon may not have vanished for everyone at once. It may vanish when measured beyond belief. That is not mystical language. I mean the ordinary human belief that the moon is there, that moonlight comes from it, that the sky is consistent, that the familiar object above us requires no further proof. Tonight, proof destroyed familiarity. We looked too closely. Something looked back through the missing explanation. At 0430, I began preparing this transmission for external relay. I delayed doing that because I was afraid of spreading the anomaly through audio. That remains a valid concern. But silence is no longer safety. The light is already in public systems. It is already in cameras. It is already on water. It is already in the word moonlight, wherever that word continues to be used without a moon. This transmission may not help, but an incomplete warning is better than a complete silence that looks like calm. The terrifying thing did not arrive wearing a shape. It arrived by removing one. At 0436, the pre-broadcast buffer updated again. It now contains audio from 0452. That time has not occurred yet at the moment I am speaking this sentence. The waveform is faint but readable. It is my voice. Not copied from earlier. Not assembled from fragments I recognize. A future section of this same transmission. I will not play it. I will not transcribe it. There are some loops you strengthen by proving them. I have deleted the visible file from the console. The system restored it. I disconnected the archive drive. The file remained listed. I powered off the auxiliary screen. The file name appeared reflected in the black glass after power loss. The file name is Hail Final Clear Skies. I do not like that phrase. Clear skies. The weather bulletin has used it 3 times. The logbook has not. Not yet. At 0441, I made the decision to break the path as much as possible. I turned the telescope away from the absence. The exterior light dimmed. I locked the mount manually. The light dimmed further. I covered the finder scope. The room reflections weakened. I turned the primary mirror cap halfway across the aperture before the manual wheel jammed. The cap is stuck. Half open. Half closed. The telescope is now neither looking nor blind. The terminal cannot decide how to label that. It alternates between 2 messages. Path interrupted. Path invited. Path interrupted. Path invited. I am beginning to understand why the moon mattered. The moon gave the light one enormous surface, one stable reflector, one predictable path. Without it, the light is improvising. It is using smaller reflectors, Messier reflectors, more intimate reflectors, telescopes, windows, water, eyes, microphones, words. That may be why this feels personal now. Not because it wants me specifically, because I am reflective enough. A human being is full of surfaces that return the world badly. Memory, fear, language, a voice. At 0448, the carrier tone began under my microphone. You may hear it now. Do not raise the volume. It is easier to notice at low level. It sits just below the room hum, a clean tone. Too clean for our equipment. It has no static. Static would be comforting. Static means interference. This is not interference. This is alignment. I have reduced microphone gain twice. The tone remains the same level in the recording. That means it is not entering through the microphone. It is entering through the record. I am going to continue anyway. At 04:51, the west blind stopped glowing. For 12 seconds, the room returned almost to ordinary darkness. Then the printer activated. One page. No header. No timestamp. Just one line centered on the paper. Clear skies with strong moonlight after sunrise. I stood there reading it while the room tone changed. After sunrise. Strong moonlight after sunrise. Not night. Not reflection. Not the familiar pale kindness of a lunar sky. Moonlight after sunrise. A phrase that should cancel itself. A phrase that did not. At 04:52, the weather bulletin queue reopened. I disabled the scheduler earlier. It reopened anyway. The bulletin text is now on screen. I am going to read it once, because if I do not, the system may play it without me. This is still my voice. This is still one record. The bulletin reads, clear skies expected across the valley. Visibility excellent. Lunar illumination remains above normal after sunrise. The moon is not required for continued moonlight. Reflective conditions are favorable. Observers are advised to remain available. I did not write that. No one at this station wrote that. It is built from weather language, but it is not weather. It is instruction-wearing forecast. The phrase observers are advised to remain available is now repeating in the side log. I will not repeat it again. At 04:55, the eastern horizon began to brighten. Real sunrise should help. That was my last ordinary hope. Sunlight should overwhelm moonlight. Day should erase the contradiction. The human mind understands darkness as dangerous and morning as rescue, even when we know better. The ridge line is now blue. The sky above it is softening. The stars are fading. The lunar absence is harder to locate. That should be good. But the moonlight has not faded. It is still on the gravel. It is still on the dome. It is still on the microphone rim. It is still in the cup across the room. Sunlight is arriving. Moonlight is staying. Two incompatible lights are now sharing the same surfaces. The shadows outside are splitting. One shadow west. One shadow east. One from the rising sun. One from the missing moon. The world has two explanations for every object. That may be the final stage. Not darkness. Not destruction. Contradiction made stable. A reality where wrong conditions continue long enough to become weather. At 04:58, the terminal stopped using the word lunar. The object field now reads, secondary light system active. I do not know whether secondary means after the sun. I do not know whether it means after the moon. I do not know whether it means after us. I am going to end this transmission before the forecast repeats. I am leaving the recorder running for 30 seconds after sign-off. If the carrier tone continues, preserve it. If another voice appears, do not enhance it. If the room becomes silent, preserve that too. My final recommendations are limited. Do not point optical instruments at the missing lunar position. Do not use water, mirrors, or dark screens to test the light. Do not trust automated weather language that describes moonlight after sunrise. Do not assume the moon is the source of what remains. And if you hear your own words before you speak them, stop speaking. I know that instruction arrives too late for me. Maybe that is the point. Maybe warnings are only another kind of reflected light. This is Daniel Hale, Westbridge Lunar Calibration Observatory, Emergency Relay Channel 1720. The moon is absent. The light is active. The path is not complete. I am signing off before the sky learns how to finish my sentence. Clear skies across the valley. Visibility excellent. Strong moonlight expected after sunrise. No lunar object required. Observers remain available.